everyone, Emily Teacher here. Today we'll read together The Great Age of Castles. Castles seem like magical places to those who have only read about them in fairy tales. The reality, however, was much different. True, they were homes to queens and kings and to great ladies and lords. Yet we can tell from the castles that have survived that they were not pleasant places in which to live. So today we're talking all about castles, and maybe in fairy tales or in shows or movies, we see them as these glorious places. But what we know from the ones that are still around is that they weren't really great places to live. Let's find out why. Their outside walls were made of massive blocks of stone and were up to 20 feet thick. Living inside such thick stone walls must have felt like living in a cave. The rooms inside the castle were often clammy. In the winter, icy drafts blew through the narrow, glassless windows. In the heat of summer, the stench from the animals kept inside the castle, as well as from the unwashed bodies of the people, would have been overpowering. Fragrant herbs were used to mask the smells. One of the servants' jobs was to strew them on the castle floors. So, really, these castles, we know they were made of blocks of stone, very thick walls, and they had very thin windows throughout most of it. So, it must have felt very dark, kind of like living in a cave. It mentions the winter, um, the icy wind would have blown through the windows to make it very cold and wet feeling. In the summer, it would have been really hot, but also there were animals kept inside the castle, and people back then didn't really take baths or showers. So the heat would have made the animals and the people smell really, really bad. So much so that there were fragrant herbs grown outside the castle, so that a servant could pick these herbs that smelled very strong, and they would put them on the castle floors to stop you from smelling all the bad smells in the castle. The Great Age of Castle building was the 700-year period from around 800 to 1500. Castles built at the beginning of this period were fairly simple wooden constructions. These have long since disappeared. The ones built later were made of stone and were much more elaborate. They had many private rooms and splendid furnishings. There was a great hall where banquets were held and visitors were greeted and entertained. So, it's a long period of time when castles were around. They used to be made of wood, but not for long because wood doesn't last very well. And they started to make it out of stone. So anywhere there was a lot of stone would have been really convenient to make a castle. They had a lot of rooms and a lot of like beautiful furnishings. In the Great Hall is where banquets were held and visitors would come and be entertained. So usually there would be a big long banquet table and lots of places for people to sit. The main reason for building a castle was to provide a sanctuary in times of danger. The castle protected not only those who made their homes inside its walls, but also for those who lived in the vicinity. They could move inside the castle grounds if a hostile army approached. When an attacking army had first to cross the moat, a wide, deep trench filled with water that surrounded the castle. Then the attackers had to scale the high outside walls on ladders or platforms. Those defending the castle could retaliate by shooting arrows at them, or by dropping rocks, or pouring boiling liquids on them. If the attackers were repelled, they might begin a siege. The purpose of a siege was to starve the defenders into surrendering. It could last for many months before one side or the other gave up. So the castle was mostly used for protection. There was the people who lived inside, but those who lived around the village surrounding the castle, if an army came to attack, the people would all go inside the castle and live there together until it was safe to come out. If there was an army, usually there was a moat, a trench dug around the castle filled with water. So they had to go over the moat and then they had to climb up these walls, which would have been very hard to go up. And during that, there was 3 different ways that the defending castle could protect themselves. They could shoot arrows, drop rocks, or pour these boiling liquids on top of the enemies. But then if the enemies could not get inside, sometimes they would stay outside and try to keep food or other things from going into the castle. So they would block the castle so they could not get any more food or materials, and see which side would give up first. When gunpowder came into use around 1500, cannons could breach even the thickest walls. Castles were no longer the havens they once had been. Many were abandoned and fell to ruin, but a number of them are still standing. In some cases, their modern owners have restored them and made them more comfortable for today's occupants by installing modern plumbing and electricity. Many castles are open to the public as museums or luxury hotels. Today, you can enjoy some of the bygone magic of castles by visiting castles in Germany, particularly along the Rhine River and in Great Britain. So once gunpowder became a thing and cannons and those things started to come about, the walls of castles were no longer safe, so they stopped being used. People either left, um, and let them crumble over time, but there are still some that are around. Sometimes modern owners, they might buy a castle and restore it, add plumbing and lighting, but castles are usually pretty big, and this would be really expensive to do. That's why a lot of them are open to the public, like as museums or hotels. And if you go to Germany and Great Britain, you can find a lot of the really old castles in those areas. Thank you for reading with me today all about castles. If you want some links related to this article, we do have them listed down in the description below.